The catalyst for memory. The afternoon sun filtered through the high windows of the study, cutting a sharp line across the cluttered wooden table. On one side sat Thomas, his fingers tracing the edge of an open Bible, his expression fixed in a tight frown of concentration. Opposite him sat Elena, quietly turning a worn wooden cross over and over in her hand. Thomas broke the silence, his voice carrying the frustration of someone wrestling with a puzzle that refused to fit together. I find that God does not draw stark lines for us to easily follow, Thomas said, leaning forward. In fact, sometimes things appear to be completely contradictory until you take the time to explore a bit further. Just look at these two passages in Exodus. He tapped his finger on the page. In Exodus 13:9, it says, "It shall be as a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt." It's a command for a physical, visual marker. Thomas flipped a few pages over, his frown deepening. But then you get to chapter 20, verse 4, the Decalogue itself. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth." So which is it? Are we supposed to create physical markers of faith, or does the physical world completely distort the divine? Elena listened intently, a faint, understanding smile touching her face. She set her wooden cross down on the table between them. "You've hit on a classic tension in Hebrew literature, Thomas," she said softly, "and you're spot on. Ancient texts rarely hand us flat, one-dimensional answers. They invite us to dig beneath the surface. At first glance, those two passages do seem to pull in opposite directions, but the resolution to the apparent contradiction lies in looking at intent versus representation, or, more simply, the difference between a reminder and an idol. "How do you mean?" Thomas asked, leaning back. "Look at the command to remember in Exodus 13, Elena explained, gesturing to his open Bible. God is establishing the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The language is functional and relational. The physical sign, whether they originally meant it as a metaphor for keeping God's actions at the forefront of their thoughts, or literally, like the tradition of tefillin, is never the object of worship. It points backward to an action, for with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. It's a tool to direct the mind toward God's law. It's a catalyst for active memory." Okay, Thomas nodded slowly. "And the prohibition in chapter 20? The context shifts entirely from remembrance to the boundaries of worship," Elena said. "The second commandment forbids making a carved image or likeness of physical things to bow down to them. In the ancient Near East, an idol wasn't just a statue. It was believed to capture or house the essence and power of a deity, so humans could manipulate or manage that power. By forbidding a physical likeness, the text protects the transcendence of God. It asserts that God cannot be captured, localized, or represented by human hands." She drew a quick mental contrast for him. "When you place them side by side, the lines aren't contradictory, they are complementary boundaries. A sign points away from itself toward God's historical action, reminding the human to submit. An idol draws attention to itself, attempting to confine or control the divine through a physical form. A sign is meant to be read, Thomas, while an idol is meant to be worshipped. One sparks a relationship, the other freezes it." Thomas stared at the pages, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing as the pieces clicked into place. "Exodus 13 uses the physical world to point the heart toward the invisible God," he murmured. "Exodus 20 stops us from reducing the invisible God down into a physical object." He looked down at the table, his eyes landing directly on the wooden cross Elena had placed between them. A new thought struck him, and he looked up, his expression sharpening. "This leads me to my next query then," Thomas said, pointing to the jewelry. "What about Christians wearing crosses? How does that fit into this balance?" Elena picked the cross back up, holding it between her thumb and forefinger. "The practice sits directly in the center of this exact tension. It functions beautifully as an illustration of how a single object can walk the razor-thin edge between an Exodus 13 sign of remembrance and an Exodus 20 carved image. It all depends on the heart of the wearer and the context of the culture." She held up the cross. "On one hand, it functions precisely like the memorial between your eyes. When early Christians used it, it wasn't fashion, it was a radical, dangerous marker of identity. It points backward to a historical event, the crucifixion and resurrection. It says, 'With a strong hand, the Lord brought us out of the bondage of sin.' It acts as a visual accountability partner, reminding the person to walk in a manner worthy of their calling. Even the design reflects this focus on memory. Protestants keep the cross empty to point to the resurrection, while Catholics and Orthodox Christians use the crucifix to focus the mind on the visceral reality of the sacrifice. In both cases, it's a window, but it can degrade, Thomas anticipated, catching her drift. Exactly, Elena said, her tone growing more serious. The physical nature of human beings means that any sign can slide into an idol if we aren't careful. The cross crosses the line into an Exodus 20 violation when the focus shifts from the God of the story to the object itself. If someone treats a cross necklace as a talisman, a good luck charm that possesses a protective aura, or guarantees God's favor regardless of their heart posture, it has become an idol. It's an attempt to manage divine power. She set the cross back down on the wood with a soft click. Or it becomes a badge of cultural tribalism, used to claim status or superiority over others, rather than to foster personal submission. Or worse, it's completely commercialized and reduced to a purely decorative aesthetic choice, emptying the symbol of both its challenge and its meaning. Thomas watched the small wooden symbol resting on the table. So the object itself isn't the problem. No, Elena agreed. Unlike ancient idols, no one wears a cross thinking, this is what the invisible creator of the universe looks like. It doesn't attempt to capture God's form, but it can capture the human heart. The dividing line is entirely internal. She looked at Thomas, offering the ultimate measure of the tension they had been tracing. Is the cross a window or a mirror? If it's a window, the wearer looks through it to remember their savior and check their own behavior. If it's a mirror, it's just being used to project an image.